Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. We're going to take on a short little, fairly simple project today, and that's going to be building the transmission cooler for the car. Now in the last video I showed the core and the fan, and I have since acquired the rest of the materials to put this transmission cooler together. So they're sitting here on the bench. Let's go through them real quick. We have obviously our fan. We have our core, we have this piece of 60,000 thick aluminum sheet metal that will serve as the fan shroud, and we have 4 different pieces of aluminum strip stock ranging from 2-inch wide all the way down to 1-inch wide, and I guess the in-between would be our 1.5 inches. So these pieces will serve as the tank bodies. This will be the shroud, as I said. We have our fan, and then we have 2 number 12 ORB female weld bungs that will serve as the inlet and outlet for it. And as I've said before, I like to use ORB bungs or NPT bungs, something that allows the actual AN fitting itself or the adapter fitting to be able to thread in and out of whatever tank or heat exchanger or what have you that I'm building, as this allows the ability for that AN portion to be replaced should it ever become damaged without having to cut and weld and what have you. So with all of that said, we can go ahead and get started in building this cooler setup. In the first order of business, we'll be building the shroud, which is a little bit different than how I normally do this in terms of order of operations, but we need to build the shroud first, as it will overhang the core slightly. I forget which dimension it overhangs, but it will due to the size and diameter of the fan. So the reason that we have to do it that way is the placement of the shroud directly dictates where the inlet and outlet are going to be. So shroud needs to happen first, then the tanks can happen, and then everything can go together from there. So hopefully that makes sense. And we can go ahead now and start getting this fan, or start getting the fan shroud made and proceed with the rest of this project. And beyond this project, I had a couple of other parts come in. It's been like Christmas every few days here lately, trying to get parts together to get this car wrapped up. And we'll go over those later on in the video. But for now, let's go ahead and get this shroud knocked out so we can get the rest of this cooler knocked out. We now have the fan shroud completed. So I went ahead and, as you saw, put 4 rib nuts in. It holds the fan perfectly. On the bottom side, the rib nuts sit inside, where they sit higher up than the bottom edge of the shroud. So there'll be no issues with it rubbing, or with the rib nuts rubbing on the core itself. And let's see if I can do this with one hand. And with the shroud and the fan on the core, it fits perfectly. So that went awesome. Far better than I ever could have expected, as behind the scenes I did attempt a first rendition of this, or of the Shroud rather. Did not come out well, and learned a little bit as far as order of operations go and correct material selection. This is the first iteration. You can see the nice bend and the ugly brakes. That is 100,000 thick 6061 aluminum, which, if you know anything about aluminums, 6061 really doesn't like to bend, let alone if it's 100,000 thick. That was a project destined for failure from the get-go. And the other important thing to note, as far as order of operations is concerned, when you're building a shroud like this with fairly short little flanges, you need to do all of your brake work and all of your bending first, and then punch the fan hole into it secondly, as you need the material that is removed with the fan cutout in place to make the brakes and to not have the shroud bow the way that the aborted attempt ended up bending, as you saw. So quick little note there. Hopefully it saves you guys a little bit of trouble if you're ever building a shroud like this, but I digress. So now that we have the shroud completed and everything sits fine here, I can go ahead and begin figuring out the construction of the tanks. Now, I went ahead, and as you saw, this is just a scrap piece, but the same style material. I went ahead and I got just this Home Depot 1/8 inch thick aluminum strip stock. Now, the reason I did this instead of going to my local metal supplier is the dimensions of this 2-inch strip stock and the 1-inch strip stock and even the 1.5-inch strip stock. Everything works out perfectly to fit the ORB fittings where they need to fit everything the way it needs to on the core. The 1-inch strip stock fits perfectly with nice outside corner joints along both sides of both top and bottom of the tanks. And I didn't see a need to complicate this any more than I needed to. So went ahead and just got some basic strip stock from Home Depot. It'll work fine. I've used that stuff for brackets and a ton of other projects or a ton of other parts on various cars, and I really like it. It welds nice, works out great. So all that aside, I can go ahead and begin dimensioning the tanks. And I think I'm going to do these a little bit differently than I normally build 1/8 inch thick tanks. And what I am going to do, I guess I can pull this off of here. I'm going to build both tanks, or both the face tanks, if that makes any sense. Tank like this, and the bottom side, and same on this side here. Those will be 2 pieces, obviously, and then the portion that goes along the top here, I'm going to attempt to make those out of 1 piece. So rather than having 5 sides or 5 pieces for each tank, I'll cut 2 pieces out of it and make it 3-piece, doing that bent the bent tops to each side of the tank. So with the 1-inch strip stock that will be those top and bottoms of the tank, it's malleable enough where I should be able to do this without much trouble. And I think it'll make for a little bit cleaner look and less pieces, less welds, less chance of failure. So again, all of that aside, let me go ahead and start doing some dimensioning, some drafting, and before long we'll have these tanks cut out and we'll be ready to go. One other quick note before we dive into this is that this cooler is going to be a dual pass cooler. And I don't really see any reason why I shouldn't make it a dual pass. And I really like making dual pass coolers for heat exchangers, fluid heat exchangers rather, as the concept of flowing the fluid across the core twice, giving it twice the amount of time to cool, I really like that concept. So I take back a little bit of what I said, where we'll end up adding a couple of pieces to the actual fitting side. The receiving side, these are talking about the tanks obviously, receiving side will be 3 pieces. The fitting side will be a couple of more, but that's no big deal, as the benefits of the dual pass far outweigh the little bit of extra work involved with making them. So again, all that aside, let's go ahead, start drafting, and get to this. And we have the inlets, or I guess inlet and outlet of the transmission cooler fabricated, tacked onto the core, and ready to be welded. So I went ahead and I welded the divider fully around. It's welded to the core, welded to this tank, and all sealed up. So that way there'll be no cross flow between the two tanks. It was easy to do with this, or with this core, with it having these thicker portions that I guess the thicker dividers between the air side and the fluid side. So I was able to weld that on the inside there, and as is typical when I'm building coolers like this, I like to leave a gap so I can get penetration to the core itself. So this is all set up. We have our two number 12 fittings, inlet and outlet, or inlet and outlet, depending on however I plumb it. And the reason I went with number 12s is they are oversized, and I can always undersize an adapter fitting going into them. So I'd rather have it be oversized and undersize the fitting than have the bung itself be undersized and then be stuck in the same situation if I had to modify it, or be stuck in a situation where I would have to modify it, and that would be kind of a nightmare that I'm trying to avoid. So now that we have this side completed, I can move on to this side here, and before long we'll be ready to weld all of this up, weld the shroud on, and we will have a completed transmission cooler within, hopefully by the end of the day. So let's get back to it. We now have the tank on the other side of the core fabricated, tacked together, spaced out appropriately, and ready to weld. So that only leaves welding left to finish this transmission cooler. So let me go ahead, get the machine turned back on, get everything set up and squared away, ready to go, and we can make this transmission cooler all one piece, then get the shroud put on, and have ourselves a completed, pretty nice little transmission cooler for the silver car. there we have a completed transmission cooler for the silver car. So, fan shrouds welded the whole way around. I have 3 out of the 4 bolts. I had to use, I believe they're 1/4 20 rib nuts, and I don't really have many standard fasteners here, so I found 3. I'll have to get a 4th or get a new set of 4, and then I can fasten the fan down the whole way. But I wound up putting some foam around the perimeter of the fan just to help it seal up to the shroud a little bit better, as thin sheet metal, lots of heat welding, gets a little bit bendy, but it'll work fine and it will do its job perfectly. So I am stoked with how this came out. Dual pass, as I said before, all the welds came out nice, was able to fill the gaps in between tanks and core perfectly fine. Nice divider here for the inlet and outlet side, and it looks pretty cool with the little angle cuts that I put on it. So definitely very happy with it, and another item checked off the list of parts to build or acquire for the silver car before it finally makes noise again. Now let's go over some of the new parts that have came in for the car, and unfortunately we'll have to remake another part for it, but not a big deal, and I guess we'll start with that so I can show you guys what's going on. So you may remember we just remade the hot side intercooler tube for this turbo setup. Well, we will have to have Mark III of that intercooler tube in the near future. That's my fault, it's on me. I did not allot enough clearance for the screen filter, screen guard that you see on the compressor inlet right here. This is from S&B Filters, and it is set up for a 6-inch inlet, which obviously this turbo has. Neat thing is you probably can't see it through the mesh, or maybe you can, but it has a built-in velocity stack, so that's kind of cool. Whether it serves any benefit or not is yet to be seen, but the intercooler tube, while it did not hit the radiator, it ends up hitting the side of our screen filter. So thankfully I have a few extra tight radius 90-degree bends, as you guys saw when we built this intercooler tube, so I can remake it for a 3rd time, which I absolutely love building the same parts over and over, but not a big deal. This is a pretty easy one, thankfully. I just have to order one more long radius 90-degree bend, as I did like how the form of it came out with the 2 tight radius bends on the compressor outlet going into the long radius on the intercooler inlet. So I will end up addressing that off camera, as there's no reason to make another video of building the same part again, but I'll get that squared away. It'll finally be all good to go, and that will be one more problem solved again. Beyond that, I have a few other parts on my table here. So first of them is this guy right here. And what this is a universal DIY steering column kit from Motion Raceworks. Now, you can see the factory steering column right here, and you can see the aftermarket one right here. And obviously there's a massive difference in what equates to the diameter or the amount of space that the column takes up between these two options. Now, I had every intent to use the factory column. However, with the fiberglass dash, it doesn't allow me enough space to have the factory column go into place without doing some significant cutting that there really wouldn't be a great way to make the dash look aesthetically pleasing after the fact. So this was the next best option. So I already started dissecting the factory column a little bit. I cut off the quick release splined hub. It's a Grant piece to match the Grant wheel that I have for the car. This will end up getting welded onto this side, and then I'll end up scavenging this splined section right here that will go on the opposing side, and that opposing side will link up to the steering rack and all the rest of the steering components in the car currently. So all I'll have to do is measure lengths, cut this down to length, as it has this little lock collar on the bottom, and these some sort of plastic spacers, which actually end up being the concentric guides for the inner shaft. As I'm not sure if I'll be able to do this one-handed. Yeah, you can see that that spins inside of there, and that is how it works. And obviously I have to build my own mounts off of it, but not a big deal, and that will be a much easier, much better solution than trying to figure out a way to integrate the factory column. And I guess there really not being much of a way to integrate it. Only reason I wanted to is to be able to say that I had tilt in my race car, or a tilt steering wheel in my race car, but I will gladly sacrifice that to not chop that fiberglass dash up anymore. And the last part, some of you guys may be able to put the pieces together. M&M transmissions. Obviously the box isn't large enough for a transmission, but let's go ahead and see what's inside the box. This is a piece that I am very, very excited about. I've wanted one of these for a long time and finally decided to pull the trigger and get one here and make it a reality. So what this is the shifter for the car. And these are very, very nice pieces. They come pre-assembled with your cable, all of your bracketry and everything else. So I can go ahead and I will end up pulling the brackets that I had purchased for the car off of it and using everything that M&M provides. As it's already assembled, why not? It's also set up from M&M with a little air shift solenoid, little electrical connector, and they also give you the other side of, it's a weather pack connector. They give you the other side of it so you can wire in for air shifting without having to figure out a way to integrate a solenoid, which is pretty cool. The other thing to note is, if you guys can see there, the pattern of the shift gate may be a little bit different than what you may be accustomed to. So this is set up for what's called either a safe neutral or a clean neutral. And what the purpose of that is, you can see this is first gear right here, second gear, third gear, and if you pull the lever and click it up one more, you pop it into neutral. The reason for that is, on an aluminum rod car, you really don't want to have a hard decel like you would going through the traps at the drag strip with an aluminum rod engine. It is not good for the rods, and the last thing that I want with this thing is a rod failure at the end of what will be a 5-ish year rebuild. And last thing I want is something stupid like that to happen and put me right back to square one, more or less. So this, coupled with the valve body and the transmission, will greatly assist in saving that engine, hopefully. Obviously, I can't predict the future, but hopefully it will keep the rods in the block and keep everything working harmoniously. The last thing that I'll show on this is on the bottom side here. This webbing is very cool. I really like their design here. And every single one of these holes is a threaded bolt hole. So they give you a multitude of different options as far as locations for a mount, and I am really happy about that. Rather than being married to one particular location, they give you all kinds of locations that, or all kinds of options for locations that you can mount this shifter if you don't want to use their tube mount, which I'll end up building my own mount for it just because I'm hard-headed and I want to build everything myself for it. But that is about it for new parts for this thing. And yeah, that should be probably about it for new stuff for the car for right now, which obviously there'll be more things coming in the not too distant future as I'm really trying to get this thing finished and get it up and running in the near future as opposed to the far future. So now, with all of that rambling aside and another project completed for the silver car, that is going to be a wrap for this video. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one.